Now we have a reticle that shows where our splatter will land, but I don't want it to be visible on the water itself, and I made a mistake that makes it invisible under mountains. Let's first fix the mistake. The mountains can be 20% more and the valleys 20% less than the radius, so the height of the decal should be at least 40% of the radius. And now it's visible on the mountains. To make the reticle not project on the water, we can make use of Godot's render layers. We can find them in the project settings, and they work similar to the physics layer. Let's give them some names: the terrain, water, weaponry, enemies, and player. In global, let's create functions that convert our layer number to an ID, just like we have for the physics layer. We'll slightly change the current layer for our name to include collision, and copy and paste it to the existing functions. Then we duplicate the declaration to create our render variable. Let's also create a separate fill collision layer function that we call from the fill layers, and duplicate this function for the render layer. And also duplicate the function to get the render layer ID, and change the name of both of those functions to indicate which layer we're getting the ID from. Then we'll update the scripts that use this collision layer function and check if we didn't break anything. Everything still seems to work, but before we can continue, in global I forgot to change the amount of layers for the render function to 20, and I forgot to change the text to get the layer names from the correct settings page. Now in the planets we can set the render layer of the sea. The render layer is by default 1, which is equal to terrain, so let's first set it to 0. Then we can set our desired water layer active with the set layer mask value, and our function to get the ID by name. For the reticle decal, we need to set the layer in the call mask, but there is no function to set the separate layers like there is for the physics layer or the layer mask. So let's make one. In our general script, we'll create a static function setMaskLayer, which needs the mask, layer, and value number to set it as, and returns the mask as int. First check if the layer index is in the range of the render layer, and then subtract by 1, because the layers start from 1 and the binary number from 0. We'll use some bitwise operations to make sure that the target layer bit is not set, and if the wanted value is 1, then we set the bit before returning the mask. Now in the player, we can first set the call mask to 0, so it won't project on any layers, and then set the mask with our general function and our getLayerID function to only project on terrain. Now when we start our game and look at the reticle, it still seems to be projected on the sea, until we move. Then it seems to get updated and starts to work as intended. The reticle is also projected on the enemies and splatters, but they are still considered terrain because we haven't assigned them a render layer yet. So let's do that first. First set the render layer to 0, and set the weaponry layer for the splatter, and set the enemies layer for the enemy. When we take a look in game, however, this also doesn't really seem to work, and seems to be a bug. So I downloaded the latest engine, and when I start the game now, the reticle is no longer visible on the water, and when I hover over an enemy or fire a splatter, they also don't get in the way of the reticle.